This is my e-portfolio reflection and presentation. So here we have rhetorical seeing, which is basically the lens at which we view the world's elements. So I was going to show a preview of it versus my climate change PSA, where the audience had to critically analyze and determine how the pictures and images and the messages was meaningful and persuasive. And then here are pictures from my Juneteenth presentation on Black excellence, and it shows how pictures can speak 1,000 words. And here is Maya Angelou's and I Know Why a Caged Bird Sings book, the Black Lives Matter symbol, and a picture of her with Malcolm X, which all explain a story. I use these pictures to kind of demonstrate who Maya Angelou was, how she connected to the people, and then what she fought for pretty much, which was equal rights and Black excellence. And then Maya Angelou is a part of my rhetorical situations, mainly ethos, as she coordinated many events and worked with Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. in their respective organizations. So she was basically a very credible individual, and she evoked resilience and pride within the African American community. And then for text-to-text remediation, I showed that it was very present when explaining her situations with Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr., and also used it in my presentation involving her Still I Rise poem, where I've changed the original format of her works and compiled it into a presentation for a set of audiences who have done some research on some influential African Americans. I conditioned the presentation to give a lot of background information and basically the beginning of Maya Angelou's life all the way until the end, so it was easy to follow along with my Juneteenth presentation. And I also involved Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. so for some overlay between my presentation and maybe some other people's research as well. And then here I am breaking down an image, and the reason I chose the But Still Like Air I Rise poem is because it's a very complex image in a way that this poem conveys her resilience, overcoming adversity, and strength of her spirit. And the reason I chose this poem is because if you read it, it goes very deep, because it talks about like the sun, the moon, the black ocean, the tides, and more. And these references are to natural events which help portray the Black community as a people who are vast and continue to rise after each fall. And Maya Angelou is part of the civil rights movement. I explained her work with many civil rights leaders and explained how her poems and stories capture the reason for her resilience and strength. BLM is a movement to counter racial inequality, discrimination, and racism. So that was a perfect symbol to have in the text and convey these messages and build up to a context similar to the BLM movement. And then for complex concepts within the Black excellence, I showed the civil rights were important to give context to why African American community were protesting about their situation, because there's no fair world where one person has to go to one school while the other gets to go to another purely based off skin color. And this created a revolutionary act that sparked outcries for freedom, equality, and leaders within the community. One of these leaders so happened to be Maya Angelou, and the nature of her story resonated with so many African Americans. She was also actively involved with the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, the SCLC, led by Martin Luther King Jr., and also worked with Malcolm X. Her activism extended to advocating for racial equality and the women's rights. And then for my PHMD explanations, I was going to do something a little bit different and unique, where I was going to include pictures of the experts speaking with subtitles, since I thought it would help with my explanations. So my PHMD on CBD uses visual rhetoric because it engages deeply with the idea of visual rhetoric by analyzing how the American Heart Association and PBS media outlets use images and videos to make data about CBD more persuasive. Both media sources use visual elements such as infographics, graphs, and video interviews to support their claims about the CBD's impact, and that directly connects to the Module 3 objective of identifying how images and other visual modes work alongside text to persuade and inform audiences. There is also a strong sense of rhetorical situations involving my PHMD. The American Heart Association's videos highlights intersectionality, focusing on race, gender, and sexuality affects susceptibility to CBD, while PBS presents historical and epidemiological data. Each source carefully considers its audience, purpose, and context, which was a key idea from Module 3. For the PBS video, I used pathos to instill fear about how CBD is considered #1 killer, and for the American Heart Association, I used logos by bringing in statistics. Using the Toulmin model and rhetorical appeals, ethos, pathos, logos, my draft also explores how multimodal arguments are shaped based on exigence and constraints each source faces in public health communication. My PHMD also touches upon bias and framing, which Module 3 encourages us to recognize in visual and multimodal text. As you can see here, CBD deaths have gone down drastically Yet in the popular media sources, it is treated as like the worst possible disease to get. So in my PHMD, I noted how both sources selectively frame CVD as an urgent health crisis, but don't highlight improvements in healthcare and education that could reduce the threat. This reveals how what is shown or left out visually affects how the public understands an issue, and implicit engagement with the power of visual design and selective representation. Compared to the more informal and creative approach used in the Black Excellence Project, the research project is more of an analytical and evidence-based project requiring me to deeply engage with scholarly and visual media through a critical rhetorical lens. The PHMD project emphasized structure, basically the Tillman model, credibility, ethos from the PHMD, the layered appeals, and it trained me to think how texts are designed to create informal analysis and make arguments. I had to analyze statistics and speaker diversity, identifying how media construct meaning visually as much as they do verbally. In contrast, the Black Excellence Project invited a more narrative and expressive approach to visual communication, while it still had rhetorical goals uplifting the underrepresented stories, such as Maya Angelou, and highlighting identity. It was a less research heavy and more timeline associated, if that makes sense. Just putting factual information when it happened instead of the CVD project, which was more broad and a heavily fact-based argument. The visual rhetoric was also driven by more emotional resonance and cultural symbolism than academic citation or statistical logos. This helped me increase the power of my visual storytelling, but the PHMD draft deepened my understanding of how persuasive multimodal texts are built on layered rhetorical frameworks, even in the science or scientific or public health discourse. Thank you for watching my presentation.